The Geneva Summit for Human Rights and Democracy assembles each year to shine a spotlight on the urgent human rights situations that require our global attention. The Geneva Summit is sponsored by a coalition of 25 human rights NGOs from around the world. Human rights heroes, activists and former political prisoners from China, Cuba, Iran, North Korea, Pakistan, Russia, Venezuela and many other countries are here today to testify about their own very personal struggles for human rights, democracy and freedom.
Yet despite the brutality, a small number of courageous men and women around the world are willing to sacrifice their own freedom and sometimes their own lives for the cause of human rights.
The vast majority of the world's worst abusers of human rights received immunity. They received impunity. Even worse, many of these non-democratic, authoritarian, oppressive regimes actually sit as members on this 47-nation body. It includes countries like China, Cuba, Pakistan, Qatar, Eritrea, Philippines, and the list goes on and on.
Ensaf Haidar is a human rights activist and the wife of Raif Badawi, a Saudi blogger sentenced to 10 years in prison, a hefty fine and 1,000 lashes for creating a website called Free Saudi Liberals. He was indeed lashed 50 times in public and remains threatened behind bars. 6 years later, Ensaf is still fighting, and today she is at the Geneva Summit with her 3 kids, who also had the opportunity to speak on stage and to urge the Saudi government to release their innocent father.
On a une fondation, elle s'appelle la Fondation Raif Badawi pour les libertés. Cette fondation, on a fait l'année 2017. C'est aussi comme un contenu qu'est-ce qu'il fait Raif, c'est pour les droits des femmes, pour les droits de l'homme. C'est encore une fondation encore jeune, mais on va grandir cette fondation et j'espère que Raif va être libre très bientôt, comme ça elle va grandir ces fondations tout seul.
And you are the son, you are 15. Tell me what it's like growing up without your father, knowing he's in prison. What's your understanding of the case? How do you cope on a day-to-day basis?
C'est vraiment très dur de me dire que dans 3 ans, je vais avoir 18 ans, je vais être adulte, puis mon père, il va pas être là, puis c'est quelque chose aussi de dire que j'ai passé toute mon enfance juste avec maman, puis j'ai pas eu mon père avec moi. C'est très dur, puis quand je vois aussi mes amis, toutes mes amies sont avec leur père, ça fait de la peine.
To call up Nurjan Baysal, who's going to speak to us. Thank you.
Last year, days after the Turkish offensive to Afrin began, I was at home. It was just after midnight. I was at home with my children. It was the normal Sunday night. Then I heard a terrible noise. The men on the other side of the door were police, and they were trying to break down my door. And they broke down my door.
Nurjan Baysal is a Kurdish writer, journalist and human rights defender. She was detained in Turkey, accused of supporting terrorist propaganda through tweets she had written on the war in Afrin. She has recently received a 10-month prison sentence for an article she wrote on war crimes committed in the Kurdish town of Jizre, where nearly 150 people were burnt alive in the basements as they took shelter during the shelling.
You have been detained, you have had death threats, and you also have a young family. Tell me what it is that actually drives you.
What drives me? I fear sometimes, but then I think that, I'm part of a big struggle, struggle of freedom, struggle of equality, struggle of democracy. I also had an investigation 2 years ago because of using the word Kurdistan. And I said to the police that here is Kurdistan. And thousands of years. Here is Kurdistan, so how you can change it? So I continue to use it, but it's forbidden. Yeah, many things are forbidden. If I can't use my language, if I can't use my identity, if I can't sing my songs, who am I then? I am trying to tell the people that this is our right. Our language is our right. Our culture is our right. Our colors are our right.
The Geneva Summit also had on display the German art collective, Truth Fighters, which exhibited paintings of murdered and persecuted journalists from around the world with the aim of keeping their stories alive. Abdelaziz is the co-founder of Raqqa is Being Slaughtered Silently, which is an independent organisation he and his partners founded to report on the atrocities happening in the city of Raqqa by ISIS when journalists were unable to access the city.
Unfortunately, the international community hasn't done enough to help the Syrian people. And I would say the Syrians are hopeless or pessimistic of the international community. So we haven't received anything from the international community besides speeches. I hope from speaking at Geneva Summit or other conference to get the attention of the international world, get the attention of politicians.
Do you ever see a time when peace will return to Syria?
I believe that the peace would come one day. It might be not in the near future or the next year or this year, but I believe the peace would reach the country one day.
The Geneva Summit also brought together government officials and activists calling for change, like Hetty Nivyabandi, a poet and an exiled Burundian democracy activist, who spoke about the case of 3 schoolgirls who were arrested for scribbling over the president's photo. What a coincidence it was, a good one, that the 3 girls were released on the same day of the conference.
And guess what? Right here at the summit, as I was speaking, the former Minister of Security from Burundi was here. He's currently a leading official in Burundi. I think he was not happy at all, but he must have gotten the message, because as soon as an hour after that, they announced that the girls were free. So this is wonderful. The Minister of Justice herself made the announcement, and the girls will now be released. So this is the power of mobilizing. This is the power of activism, and this, I think, tells anyone that you can bring change. All it takes was for anyone around the world to pick up the phone and tweet, and it made a huge difference. It has now freed 3 girls.
What's next?
Next is freeing the whole country.
We have lost 10% of our population. It means a tremendous brain drain. We're a country of immigrants, not of emigrants. So that's quite a change. It has never happened. Venezuela is the biggest diaspora in the history of Latin America. We have a regime. Actually, we don't have a government. We have a regime that has morphed into a mafia state, into a narco state, and they behave in a criminal way, which makes it almost impossible, not to say impossible, to negotiate with them any conventional way to really rescue freedom. The Security Council has proven not to be a good guardian of human values. They have failed many societies. They failed in Bosnia, they failed in Rwanda, I think they're failing now in Syria. So we cannot expect very much from the Security Council. I remember Nikki Haley, the American ambassador to the UN, asked me, do you see light at the end of the tunnel? And I said, yes, I see a lot of light. The problem is I don't know which is the length of the tunnel. So to measure, to anticipate the future of Venezuela, it is a very difficult exercise. Anything could happen at any time.
I'm proud, together with my colleagues here, to present the 2019 Geneva Summit Courage Award to Dandap Wangchen. As the inscription reads, for inspiring the world with your extraordinary courage in defense of freedom, democracy, and universal human rights. Dandap Wangchen, please come forward.
The summit honoured Dongdup Weijian, a Tibetan filmmaker and activist who spent 6 years in a Chinese prison for secretly filming life in Tibet under the Chinese Communist Party's rule.
Here in Geneva, at the seat of the United Nations Human Rights Council, it's the most important international institution that is supposed to promote and protect human rights. And sometimes they do their job, but too often they don't. And we're seeing that instead of addressing critical situations, the Human Rights Council failed to adopt a single resolution in the session that just concluded their main annual session on situations like Turkey, Pakistan, Venezuela, Russia, China. Human rights abuses around the world are going ignored, and it's the role for civil society to come in and to invite victims, activists, families of political prisoners, former political prisoners, to testify before the world. We were at the United Nations yesterday to make sure the international community, activists and diplomats, governments hear their voices. We need to be a voice for the voiceless.
The message today is loud and clear at this year's summit. If nobody speaks, then everybody will suffer. Silence helps nobody. Silence only feeds the terror. As we've seen here today, the voiceless of China, Cuba, Venezuela, Iran, Turkey and many other countries desperately need our help. They need us to tell their stories, to put the focus back on human rights and to fight for change in a world that is far from perfect.